Good afternoon, one and all. Am I audible? Good afternoon, one and all. Welcome to the fourth day of Faculty Development Program on Advanced Research and Quality Publication. For the past 3 days, we have been enriched with ideas to move on with the quality research and publications. Today, we are about to start with another session on an introduction to systematic literature review methods. To lead us through the session, we have with us today Dr. Akshi Kumar. Dr. Akshi Kumar is a senior lecturer, data science AI in the Department of Computing and Mathematics, Faculty of Science and Engineering, Manchester Metropolitan University, United Kingdom. She is a postdoc from Federal Institute of Education, Science and Technology of Ceará, Fortaleza, Brazil, and a PhD from Faculty of Technology, University of Delhi, India. Dr. Kumar has been endorsed as an exceptional talent in the field of data science AI by the Royal Academy of Engineering, UK in 2022. She has worked as an associate professor at the Netaji Subhash University of Technology, New Delhi, India, and an assistant professor at the Delhi Technological University, and has a total teaching and research experience of 16 years. Dr. Kumar has received 7 research awards for the excellence in research from various national and international organizations. Her name has been included in the top 2% scientists of the world listed by Stanford University, USA in 2021. She has also authored a monograph, Web Technology Theory and Practice, published by CRC Press, Tyler and Francis Group, and has published more than 85 peer-reviewed journal papers, including 46 expanded publications, 65 plus conference papers, with 4 Best Paper Awards and 2 patents with Indian Patent Office. She has successfully guided 5 doctorates and 32 master theses. She has been serving as an associate editor and guest editor in various high-impact journals with reputed publishers. Her research interests are in effective computing, social networks and media analytics, NLP, and AI for pervasive healthcare. I welcome you, ma'am, to this meeting. And over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for the introductions. It's a pleasure to be here and joining and sharing my knowledge at this platform. I'll be sharing the screen so that I start the discussion soon and we have time for more queries as we go ahead. I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
So I made it on a slide show as well. Is it visible? I'm audible. If there's at any point the slides are not moving or I am not audible, please let me know, right?
Yes, ma'am. It's all right.
All right. So the title for my talk is An Introduction to the Systematic Literature Review Methods. Okay, on the left side, there is a diagram, which is the core of the entire talk that I would be discussing, but we would be coming back to this diagram at a later stage. Currently, we are just going to talk about the research, how the research goes. So when you start your research journey, or anyone who plans to start a research journey, these are generally the phases of a research journey, or the phases that a research has to go through that are generally there. The first is that you define a problem where you select the topic of your research. Of course, next is a literature review, which helps you to cover the background and the related work. You basically acquaint yourself with the existing literature. Then you have the research design, where you select one or more research methodologies. Okay, you would be designing this kind of methodology, say machine learning, deep learning, you'll be using that. Then you will be developing a hypothesis, which is like stating what you intend to test and variables, your data set, your hyperparameters, if I call it. Your interpretation of the results, what is the implications of your data analysis, how the results are performing, your report findings, state the significance of your findings while comparing it to the existing work, and the further research when you follow up with more research after the review, like what has been done or not. These are generally phases of a research journey that people follow. Now, our focus of the discussion today is the second stage, which is the review literature, which is actually called the nucleus of the research, the core, the nucleus, the key that we are going to discuss. Because prior to this knowledge, this domain knowledge, the research cannot take off, if we call it this way. So this is the nucleus that we are going to discuss today. So before coming on to what is systematic literature review, let's just examine the spec literature review. Review, we know that we are trying to summarize or re-go or read through something. You know, when you divide the term research into two parts, the first component is re-search. So basically, when you start your research, it starts with a research. You start with researching some of the existing work. So research does not take off with simply like you decide, you go and you do it. No, it has to start with a research. And for you need to review some of the things that are done. And where can you get that view? That you can get through the literature. And therefore, if you see this, the literature, if we have to define a literature review is a survey of the scholarly sources. Now, scholarly sources is a very broad term if I talk about. We will discuss that there are primary sources, there are secondary sources, there are tertiary sources of literature. But as now, just combining all of them, we call them scholarly sources because they're helping the research scholar, such as books, journal articles, and theses related to a specific topic, say domain or a question. Now, I think there is someone unmute, please. Can you mute yourself?
All the participants, please mute your mic.
So it consists of an overview or a summary or an evaluation. You call it a critic of the current state of the art. Now, you must have heard, if you are an existing researcher or you're going to start your research, this term state of the art is very, very, very important to your research. State of the art, or sometimes called SOTA, is actually the knowledge of the current existing work, exactly like making a leaderboard. If I don't know if you all are from computing background, but still, on Kaggle, like you have leaderboards or any kind of crowdsourcing, competitions have leaderboards. So just consider it that the current state of the art is a kind of leaderboard that you have where you need to fill in the data, looking from all the papers that who is the leader currently, and I need to surpass the results of this person. So that's the kind of state, what in layman terms means like a state of the art. So it is the state of the art. It covers the summary, the evaluation, a critic, an overview about the current state of the art. It may also have some discussion on what are the future research, what are the methodologies used. Basically, there are two objectives of any literature review. First, the content covering the existing theories, evidence, research, and then your own perspective. First part is whatever has been done in the literature, you basically are reporting it. Then that's the part of review. If you divide the word review again, first I divided the word research. You are researching before you start the research. Now, when you start review, it's review. So basically, you are redoing, repeating, or reporting. Re stands for reporting what has already been done, and view is your viewpoint on that whatever has been done. So it's your own critical evaluation, your analysis, discussion of the content, what conclusions you draw from whatever you have collected. So basically, any review has to have these two objectives. Now, when we talk about the different kind of literature reviews, so when we talk about literature review, there is one common statement. If you do not know the past, you'll not be able to understand what's going on now, and you cannot do anything for the future. So you have to know the past to understand the present, right? That's the core of any literature review. And why is it important in scientific research? We are here talking about scientific research because research, what are your goals? Of course, we intend to do research to get papers published, to get a PhD degree or some other postdoc or something. That's our life goals, our career goals, that are our objective. scientific goal? Why is scientific research important? What impact is it making? What is the importance to the society? Firstly, the research is carried out primarily to improve the knowledge or establish a theory in the field. You're trying to contribute to the body of the knowledge. If you've heard this term, this is another technical term which is being used across the research community. It is contributing to the body of the knowledge. That is, whatever knowledge or depth that particular area has, this topic, whatever research you're doing, is contributing to that body of knowledge. Secondly, all research builds on existing established knowledge in the field. It's not that you, okay, there somebody has to start something, but then you draw the conclusions from some other research and try to correlate. It's not that it's done, it's not an invention. We are not calling an invention. We're talking about basic scientific research. So a literature review helps to familiarize the extent of knowledge in the field. Then the review traces the progress of knowledge and relationship between various thoughts. It helps to establish the limits of available information and identify the gaps. The identified gaps are investigated to establish new facts and add value to the field. And it offers an insight to authors' depth of knowledge in their field. That's the ultimate point when you write a literature review. Now, point number 5 and 6 are what lead to defining your research statement at any point of time. Because when you identify the gaps from the literature review, you are able to find out some kind of crosses. If you draw a chart that this has been done, tick mark, this has been done, tick mark. When you don't find this has not been done, same if you're trying to do some kind of a cancer detection, and say fuzzy logic has not been used, so that's a cross mark. But if deep learning LSTM has been used, that's a tick mark. So doing that tick mark and making a checker box of what has been done, what has not been done, what are the problems, that actually defines your research gaps. And through that gap, you extract your own research statement. So that's why your literature review comes at a step before your. But when we say this, then in your research journey, why is it important to have a research statement prior to the literature review? No, the research statement should be very vague. Rather, it should be a broad area of interest when you start your literature review. Okay, it can be said that I am interested in computer vision and I want its application in the area of surveillance. This is something that you can start with. It should not be with the concept of using IoT or sensor for this, but it has to gradually go deeper and be specific to your problem statement and objective. But as a start point, it has to be your interest, your guide's main interest, and the expertise, and then the area that you want to apply into. Then you also look for, then you start looking the literature. Okay, this is the work that has been done. These are the data sets that are available. This is what the other people have done. Whatever discussion I'm doing here is the generic literature review, which is the part of any research journey. So what is the importance? You need to understand and know the existing work and the past to understand the present, right? So yes. Stops. Okay. So when we talk about sources of literature, I talked about there are different sources of literature. One is primary, one is secondary, one is tertiary. Primary research means if I implement something like a deep learning based or an explainable AI based algorithm for identifying thyroid in some patients, say, right? And I have a data set and I've given a novel technique. That is my primary research. So it is a research that is published in a peer reviewed journal, right? That becomes primary literature. The primary literature is something which is original research or new scientific discovery. So your primary sources are basically your journals, your conference papers, your patents, your dissertation, technical report, thesis. These all form the primary literature. Then you move on to the secondary literature. It is basically your literature review articles, when we call secondary literature, all the literature review which are combining or compiling or organizing or integrating or giving their viewpoints about the existing works. It is basically your secondary literature. It includes your reviews, your monograph books, your encyclopedias, dictionary, yearbooks, bibliographic databases, everything, your Google Scholar, PubMed, they're all secondary sources, right? And tertiary sources. Tertiary sources are basically, there is an overlap. Some research community call this bibliographic databases and library catalogs and encyclopedia as tertiary literatures, whereas the secondary literatures are focused onto books and literature review articles. So if you look on the left side diagram, which is the spiral diagram, it divides. It also has the bibliographic databases, bioinformatic databases in the secondary, whereas in the tertiary, it only has the library catalogs and guides to literature. Whereas currently, because we all have all the indexing online and various indexings like Medline, PubMed, Google Scholar, ACM, YLib, so many digital portals. So this is the current way of dividing the primary, secondary, and tertiary literature, where the primary on the right side, that is, where the primary is the original research of the new scientific discoveries, which is given through your original research articles published in peer-reviewed journals, your conference proceedings, technical reports, and dissertations. Then secondary literature, which is basically your literature review articles and books, and tertiary literature, which includes textbooks. This books here would mean the edited books that are going on currently because they're more research oriented. Here, these are the textbooks which are very topic specific, which may or may not cover the current works. When we study textbook, it is about the general overview of a topic. It may or may not include the current research trends, and it cannot be improvised every time depending on the research papers, whereas the edited books come up as soon as the new topic comes up. So all the textbooks, dictionaries, encyclopedias, handbooks, they are the part of the tertiary literature. So any literature review you do, any literature for that matter, if you look for, so you have these kind of sources that you can gather resources from. So talking about the types of literature review, currently in theory we have 5 kind of literature review that a person can do. The first is systematic literature review, which we will discuss in length in this, like probably another 5-7 minutes. Then the theoretical literature review, argumentative literature review, narrative literature review, integrative literature review. Most of the time, we actually do a theoretical and an argumentative, narrative, and integrative combined kind of a review. If you read an article, say the past, present, and future of sentiment analysis, that's actually a combination of these 4, because it's talking about some theoretical part, it is making some argument because you're talking about the future, it is narrative because it is going with the flow, past, present, and future, and it is integrative because it is integrating the past, present, and future. So if you read a title like in a literature review, past, present, and future of, say, some area, then it is actually unknowingly combining all the areas. There's no plan. It is just a generic literature review. It does not fall into any of these categories, but a generic literature review which covers each of them. So before going on to the systematic literature review, we need to cover or understand that what are these and what difference would systematic literature, what are the drawbacks with these, or what is missing in these kind of the other 4 kind of literature reviews, that there is a need for a systematic literature review. So the first one is the traditional or the narrative literature review. This type is basically you gather the information simply. There's no way you can just simply, open your Google Scholar, type whatever you want to, gather the first 10 papers. It's up to you. As a researcher, how many papers you want. Okay, I decide only 100 papers I'm going to read. The first 100 that appear on Google Scholar regarding this topic, I'm just going to take that. So that's how you gather. It's like a brute force approach that, or based on what the researcher feels or what the guide feels or what the co-workers feel. So it's just a traditional way where you gather the research, you critique it, You make your own analysis, you summarize the body of the literature, and you draw the conclusions from the topic. So it is basically the body of the literature is made up of relevant studies and knowledge that has to be addressed. This is the traditional way. This is, why do we call it a traditional way? It backs to the time when we did not have the digital portals, when you had library and books, and where you need to find out the theory from the books and extract the experts. So it depended on the person and the library subscription. Whatever books were available in the library, that's your literature review. So that's the traditional and the narrative literature review. Next, we have the theoretical literature review, which of course helps to establish the theories that already exist, their relationship between that. So it's a more higher level critical analysis where you're trying to establish some relationship between the existing work. What is the degree of the existing theories that have been investigated, and then you develop, you're drawing a conclusion. So ultimately you're gathering, yes, your the critic is there, but the critic is more of a critical analysis and discussion. So here you may have two kinds of theoretical literature review. One is going by a chronology, that is, you can have an historical period where your first time it came, then this is the phenomenon that emerged, and then you're tracing the evolution of how the things happen. And then a methodological, where you can focus on what someone said. Okay, let me give an example to understand that. Let me give a same example of sentiment analysis. I said, if you're talking about sentiment analysis, use of machine learning, first time it was reported in this, then first time the use of sentiment analysis was reported in this, then researchers have used different techniques for this, and then context-based sentiment analysis came, then sentiment analysis in English, in Hindi, and other languages, regional languages came. So you're basically tracking how sentiment analysis has emerged as a research area. Whereas if you talk about methodology, you will start with, like, you define that the lexicon-based approaches were used first, then the machine learning based, then the hybrid of both of them, then deep learning, now moving to the explainable. So you're basically talking about the methodologies that have been used for a particular research area. So it's just a way of presenting your literature review. So it is basically, we are discussing two here, the traditional ones, which is the critical analysis, basically gathering the information and kind of compiling it. And then you have the theoretical one, which can be presented in a historical method or a chronological method or a methodological method. Then the third kind is an argumentative one, where you actually start by making an argument. You have an embedded assumption, and you have a philosophical problem. So this kind of argumentative is not basically more valid in the scientific or the computing background, if I may call, because these kind of arguments are more into the political science or the economics, where people start with a hypothesis or some assumption, and then they make an argument to prove that this is what we assume. So this is an argumentative structure, which is more focused on a philosophical and a political science. Okay, so the next is an integrative one. It's just considered a form of research where reviews, critics, synthesizes. It's an integrated way. So combining all the top three is an integrative way, and that's what we have been doing in like a past, present, and future, where you have an integrative way. Now, the last one, which is the focus of this work, is systematic. As the name suggests, systematic, systemized, or well-formed, well-mannered, whatever you may call it. This form consists of an overview of the existing pertinent literature to clearly formulated research questions. So here, you are actually trying to start with some set of research questions, right? Not the objective, not confused. You are starting with an area of study. You define some research questions, formulate the specific questions. You then search the literature based on that questions, based on the keywords on that questions, to get the answer of that question, right? And then you compile your results. So basically it uses pre-specified and standard method to identify and critically appraise relevant research, to collect reports, analyze data from the study that are included in the review. Now, in contrast to the traditional and narrative review, systematic reviews are more rigorous and a well-defined approach to reviewing the literature in a specific thing. Now, why are review needed? Before moving on to what, why, how of the SLR, as we call the systematic literature review, Why are reviews needed in any case? Literature review forms the nucleus of all scientific research at end. There are massive number of publications every day. I don't know how many, and now I don't keep account, but you also know in India, in China, in UK, in US, there are publications are going on, with the open access journal, which publish within 15 days, 1 month. It has it has become overwhelming actually to keep track of the research. It may have happened to you. It has happened to me that I am doing some research and it's gone to a normal journal, and because of the open access, that similar work has already been published. So we have been suffering from that issue of overwhelming open access one, but it has a pros and cons, and that's a different course of discussion. Then we have both print and electronic media in this case. Now, literature is available in diverse language because we have Chinese literature, Arabic, and other languages. We have different countries which may restrict and have their own indexes. And the primary studies can appear contradictory at times. Someone has reported some results, the other person may negate it and report some other results. So what are the characteristics of any of the five, literature reviews that you do, all the five that we have discussed? A good review of the literature must be comprehensive. It should cover everything. It should include up-to-date references. It should be systemic as in you should know what you're doing. It should have a flow. Here we do not mean systematic. It's systemic. It needs to have a flow of what you're talking, right? It should be reproducible. Yes, this is most important. It should be free from bias. It should be well written. It should be in the form of sum of its part. It should be clearly searched and selected. Accurate references should be given. Now, if you look at this, it should be reproducible and free from bias. These are two things which the other four may actually lack at. When you're doing a research from your own perspective, whether it's argumentative or historical, that's your own viewpoint that you're taking, historical, methodological, then what to include, what to not, especially in the traditional ones where you are just gathering without any, fixed research protocol or plan in your mind that this is how I'm going to do a research review, then your results cannot be reproducible. Somebody cannot cannot research a re-review or cannot re-review. It cannot be free from bias. So what your quality has to be excellent for it to be, considered as a good survey paper in that. So what is the need of a systematic review? What is a systematic review? The systematic review is a review that is conducted according to a clearly stated scientific research methods and is designed to minimize bias and errors inherent to the traditional narrative reviews. Now, if you compare, in a narrative review, it is broader in scope. You just define a domain. In a systematic review, it is more focused. Coming on to the sources and search, in a narrative review, you usually do not specify the resources or the sources that you're taking. It can be any book, even a white paper, gray literature as we call. It is potentially biased. Here, comprehensive sources and explicit search strategy is being used, right? The selection process in a narrative review, it is not usually specified. Again, it is potentially biased. The criterion-based selection, it is in case of your systematic review, it is a criterion-based selection. It is uniformly applied. What does this mean? We are going to discuss that. What do we mean by criterion-based selection? An appraisal, here it is a variable, it is a rigorous critical appraisal. Here you just discussed, this is the conclusion. Synthesis is a qualitative summary. Here it may include, many times it includes a quantitative summary, which is called a meta-analysis. It's like using some kind of a statistic to draw the conclusion. So it may or may not be, qualitative. It can also be quantitative, a systematic literature review. Now, why is systematic literature review needed? We have, of course, discussed why are literature review needed, what systematic literature review have to offer. Normal narrative literature review or critical reviews updated or updated. It is a very difficult task to update because you don't know the start point. What made the researcher think about this topic and how he started, why he started. Say a research started and say on mental health care started in some time of 1952, but a person who's trying to implement something using deep learning decided to include only studies after 2010, and he has not mentioned then there is no point, because it is not replicable, it is not mentioned, it cannot be updated as well. Then it may be biased by the prior beliefs, it may be commissioned due to published opinion, may have influence on that.
Excuse me,
You may
ma'am.
often miss. Yes.
Ma'am, your voice is breaking.
Is it fine now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe commissioned due to published opinion, often miss small but important effects. Different reviewers reach different conclusions. It's your own perspective, affected by subspeciality of reviewer and little attempt to discuss heterogeneity. Now, why are systematic reviews necessary? Of course, the overwhelming volume of published research material makes it impractical for any individual researcher to remain up to date on the variety of common conditions. If you decide today that I'm going to talk about this topic, or I'm going to do research on IoT-based, health management, you may find millions of papers, and it can be very overwhelming as a start point for a researcher to actually get hold of all the published data in that. So it is further complicated when individual studies report conflicting conclusions, a problem that is prevalent when there are smaller data sets and retrospective design use, especially when you have more conference papers by, not so I don't want to call them ethically correct, but when you're pressurized to publish a paper at a bachelor level degree or something, the quality of research is compromised and the results can be compromised in that sense. So you have smaller data sets, no authenticity of the results, so that can complicate your entire literature review process. So what are the key characteristics of a systematic literature review? The first step, if you look on the right side, is planning a review. You need to plan a review, then you need to conduct a review, and then you need to report a review. This is the research protocol for a typical SLR, right? The first step is planning a review, then conducting a review, then reporting a review. So it should have a clearly stated title and objective. Mind it is not the title or objective of your research thesis, your PhD or master's or any thesis. It is actually some kind of a broad, which can lead to the research statement or the title of your thesis. So something related to it, but need not be exact to your title, right? So it has to have a comprehensive strategy to search, what to include, unpublished studies, books, published, what are you going to look for? Are you going to look for the great literature or something? Then it needs to, that is the, if you look at the right side, it is the research question, the data sources that you're going to, how are you going to search, what are your search strings going to be, what is the criterion, are you going to include all the papers, or you're going to adopt some kind of an inclusion exclusion criteria? And even if there are like probably 10,000 papers which fall, which you have after using the inclusion exclusion criteria, will you be using some kind of quality criteria to filter out which are the best studies for your work? Then you are going to conduct. So it has to have an explicit and justified criteria for inclusion exclusion of a study, clear presentation of characteristics of each study included in the analysis. And then it has to have a comprehensive list of all studies, clear analysis. Ultimately, what do? So basically, these are the 5 steps that you follow for any kind of literature review, or we may also call it 6 phases. I'll define it later. You formulate the question, you conduct a literature search, refine the search by applying predetermined inclusion exclusion criteria, extract the appropriate data and assess its quality and validity, synthesize, interpret, and report data. Now, this is what defines a literature review, SLR. You formulate the research question, you adopt a research strategy, a search strategy, you do a study selection, you do quality assessment, then you extract the data and you synthesize the data. So a typical SLR in the field of computing, let me make it very clear. People have been doing SLR in different fields, in health and other fields, but in the field of computing, what we follow is the basic or the benchmark or the gold standard SLR done by Ketchenham and Charters, where they did an SLR on a software engineering methodologies. So basically, we adopt these 6 phases that were defined by the Ketchenham and Charters way back, right? So what we have here is, it is a phase-wise process supported to be studied in a well-structured manner. So we come back to the diagram which was there on the very first slide. Right here, if you are on the top, it talks about identify the issue and determine the question. So you need to have some kind of a problem in your mind. Problem as in problem, research problem. Okay, I feel, there is nothing that has been done for people with special abilities, say autism or some kind of this. I want to do something or develop something that can help them. So that can be your issue in your mind, and then you determine a question. I want to find out that how robots have helped, the people with autism. So that's a basic question. You just have a question in that. Then you start to plan your review, your protocol. That, okay, I need to find out that people with autism has some kind of scare to be in the crowd. Then what has been done so far to find out that, people can help? What supports have been available in the form of robotic things that can help people in crowd or in public? So you start searching your studies based on that, and then you sift and select the studies. You filter out using some kind of inclusion exclusion criteria, some quality parameters. Then you extract the data, assess the studies, combine the data. Okay, so far this has been done. Then you discuss the overall, then you can basically find out where is the gap, or is there a scope of doing something else in that as well. So basically, the diagram that I've discussed is written in theory here. The goal of the first phase is to ascertain and formulate a research question within the domain recognized per survey. This usually depends on your interest, the problem that you have faced, maybe your life experiences, or maybe someone in the family, or it can be directly given to you by your supervisor that this has to be done. Then the next phase is a search strategy that is designed to assign how the search would be conducted. We also call it as a search protocol or research protocol. This is primarily done to find and locate the relevant research studies addressing one or more research questions. Then the scope of the study is narrowed using the search study selection phase, where you use the inclusion exclusion criteria. And then we have the next phase as the quality assessment phase, where you check the worthiness of the paper, which is calculated using some kind of weighted parameters. The purpose of the study selection and quality assessment is basically to ensure that the quality and similarity of included studies. There can be repetitive studies which can be available. So you need to filter out the repetitive studies, clearly define the boundaries that you're including. This may also include what I called about, if I try some technology had come in 1952, but it is not feasible for me to do a literature review from that thing. I can focus on that this systematic literature review covers the study from 2006 to 2022. I can mention that in my inclusion criteria, what has been included in this literature review, what can be expected from, what duration can be expected from this literature review. So that's a part of your study selection, where you're filtering, you're sifting, you're trying to, make it focus that this is going to be, you're setting the boundaries of review. Post the screening and eligibility decision on the articles, the next is you extract the data to answer the research questions, to finally critically analyze the research domain. Now, the types of reviews we've seen, there are different kinds. There are systematic reviews, and then there are meta-analysis. If you remember, I differentiated between the narrative and the systematic reviews, where I call the narrative reviews are qualitative, whereas systematic reviews can be quantitative as well. So therefore, if you read papers about SLR on so-and-so topic, then there can be meta-analysis on so-and-so topic, or meta-synthesis on so-and-so topic. Meta-synthesis is what we call the data synthesis, the last part of the systematic reviews, which is basically qualitative, right? When you use meta-analysis, it is basically quantitative, right? So what we say is all systematic reviews are not meta-analysis, whereas all meta-analysis are systematic reviews. That's what's the concept is. So data synthesis is meta. You can have two kind of data. The last phase of an SLR can have two varieties. One is it can have a meta-analysis Meta-analysis is based on SLR, but not all SLR include meta-analysis, that's for sure. Meta-analysis is a statistical technique for combining the results of independent but similar studies to obtain an overall estimate of the research effects. Say if you're trying to find out
colleges in Tamil Nadu and hailing to Tamil Nadu.
Excuse me, participants, please mute your mic.
In India. And also I was working in Canada.
Can I request Gino to please mute your mic?
Thank you, one and all. I got a total teaching experience of 22 years.
Can I request Gino to please mute your mic? Thank you so much. All right. So if meta-analysis is to be included in a systematic review, you have to make it sure you have an experienced statistician on board or an epidemiologist. We are talking about, it's like if you're trying to find out a review of how a vaccination, has affected a public, then that's you will be using some kind of a statistical measure to find, okay, in this kind of an area in UK, in US, so many people were affected, because the age group was affected least, it did not have any kind of side effects. So that's the kind of meta-analysis, the data synthesis of a review, of a literature review that you're doing. So in that case, you need to have a statistician or an epidemiologist on board. This is generally used in some kind of survey-based studies that you do. Then you have meta-synthesis, which is a non-statistical technique. It is basically used to integrate, evaluate, and interpret the findings. So basically, whatever you do, meta-synthesis is what we generally do in an SLR and not the meta-analysis, unless you have a statistical team on board to do that. So we've understood what an SLR is, but to explain, I've taken 3 case studies here, which are actually from my own works, the 3 SLRs that I have had so far. So they're similarly extracted from them. And then I'm going to do an SLR of, and a critical analysis of all these case studies or all 3 literatures that I have worked. So yes, the first case study is an SLR process. It was titled as Systematic Literature Review of Fuzzy Logic-Based Text Summarization. Here, the first step, I have mentioned here the all steps that we use in an SLR. The first is review planning, where you plan the review effort and the training activity. You may require some kind of a training activity like you are attending this session. That's review planning. You intend to write a review. Then you define that may also have sessions with your guide or someone where you are attending some conferences to know this is an active area of research where you can contribute. So that's the part of a review planning, which helps you formulate ultimate, the domain where you want to go. You may have meetings with your guide. You may want to attend some events and get involved in some activities. Then this is the review planning stage. Next is the question formulation, where you define the research questions. In this first case study, we took 3 questions. The title was SLR of Fuzzy Logic-Based Text Summarization. We were trying to find out how far fuzzy logic has been used in text summarization. So what was the first research question that we established was, what is the need of using fuzzy logic in ATS, that is automatic text summarization. This was actually the motivation behind this was that how far it has been used, what are the motivation behind it is being used, is there a need to explore new paradigms or not. Then the research question 2 was, what are the different techniques of fuzzy logic used so far? They can be type 1, type 2, are they combined with some kind of other genetic algos or something, or neural network, say ANFIS or something. So that was the RQ2. Then RQ3, what is the accuracy of different fuzzy logic techniques on ATS? It was to find out the best techniques that have been used so far on the basis of accuracy or something. So these were the 3 RQs that were identified for the first case study. The next step was the search strategy, where you define the review scope and the search strategy. So what we did was, yes. So the search strategy was an exhaustive search for all these studies. So what we did was we extracted the terms using, these were the terms that we use: text summarization using fuzzy logic, text summarization using ML techniques, the document summarization, and fuzzy logic. This were the initial search string, I may call, which were used, and then synonyms and other things were used. So basically a search strategy is is basically telling you what to search, what you have to search. So in that, first part is you define your search strings, and then you define where are you going to search, what are your data sources. In this case, we considered 6 electronic databases to be used. That is, these search strings would be put as input in these 6 digital portals, and we are going to retrieve the papers from that. So in this SLR, 6 electronic databases named IEEE Explore, ACM Digital Library, Science Direct, Elsevier, Google Scholar, Springer, Violet Digital Online are used for selecting the relevant thing. The search term identified are used to find contents and journal papers and articles within these 6 databases. The search indices are limited to title, abstract, keywords, except Google Scholar where only title is concerned. Right, so you are taking these as search indices. Then you can also use, in this paper we've also considered the research reference section of the relevant studies to find out the cross citations, because at times they may not be indexed, there may be something they have not yet been published or removed from an indexing service, but it is an important work. So this part of reference section of relevant studies are also examined to extract the cross citation. It's a manual part that you do, that you are trying to find out the cross citation from the works that you extract. So the initial filtering that you do on the you find based on the search string is you basically look for the title, you read the abstract, you find the keywords, and then you just filter out and maintain a data set of these studies. You keep and start maintaining a folder of that all studies. So that's how you start. Then you do the cross-referencing, and there are some secondary studies which are also obtained, which are your literature review. So your search strategy, you formulated the question at the first part, then you did a search strategy where you defined a search string, what you're going to search based on the research questions. Then that search string was used on some kind of data sources, which are here the digital portals that are available. So we identified 6 of them here, and then you do a search and to find out or filter out the articles that are relevant to they apparently look relevant to your work. So it is, if search strategy was what to search, the first step was it talks about what to search and where to search. The next step is to find out the study selection, that is selection process. You have to define an inclusion and exclusion. So in this selection, you basically identify, you limit the scope of the search and weed out the non-pertinent work. As we talked about, even the repetitive work, you are defining the boundaries of your research. So the following inclusion and exclusion criteria was considered. The first criteria is that in the inclusion, you included all the empirical studies on summarization using fuzzy logic. Then study proposing fuzzy inference system for document summarization were also included. Survey of text summarization using machine learning and optimization techniques were also included. Studies combining fuzzy logic with other summarization techniques were also included. Then there were 2 more inclusion criteria, that is extensive literature studies on text summarization were included, and empirical studies comparing the fuzzy logic based text summarization techniques with other text summarization techniques were also included. This was the inclusion criteria. What was not included, what was excluded? Studies having linguistic summarization using fuzzy logic. If it was just language based, they were excluded. Studies without text summarization, that is study on video summarization, audio summarization, were not included. You know, if you start about just a summarization, it can lead to, if you just put data summarization in Google Scholar, you may get so many papers. If you focus and exclude the ones which are not talking about text summarization, you may actually filter out your job. Then studies of text summarization using ML techniques other than fuzzy logic. Studies of manual or human summarization studies, that you may find papers which discuss about summarizing based on some kind of objectivity and theoretical linguistic part of the humanities or linguistic part of the research. Then individual survey studies on either fuzzy logic on text or text summarization. The surveys which are only talking about fuzzy logic, or the surveys which are only talking about text summarization. What we included were literature studies on text summarization using fuzzy logic. Now, how do you do a quality assessment? We have got everything through the selection process, through the inclusion exclusion criteria. We have got a folder. Now we need to filter out what is quality. How do we define a quality? We will discuss in healthcare. There are some parameters which can be used for assessment of quality, but generally throughout the computing thing, we are trying to find a criterion which can lead to reduction of papers. And you can find out which are the studies which are poor or below average and should not be included in the final selection. So you kind of use a weighted parameters, and generally in literature you may find these 4 weighted parameters which allow you to do a quality assessment. You evaluate each article on the basis of novelty. That is the technique proposed in the article just an enhancement or improvement of the existing techniques? So you rate the paper in terms of, novelty. You rate the paper in terms of technical content. Is the motivation behind the proposed method clearly indicated? It's like a scale that you're rating, say 1 to 10. Your rating and your everything is, or maybe 1 to 2 or 2, you're just scoring 0 or 1. Is it novel or not? Binary, whatever you define as your quality assessment. I let you know what we used in this paper, but this is how you use. These are the 4 parameters which are used for quality assessment: novelty, technical content, results analysis. Are the results done on a standard benchmark data set or any random data set? You can also include, are they using some kind of gold standard performance measures, or are they comparing within existing models? So this is how do you evaluate it? This paper is good, this is not good, it does not compare with the existing work. This paper is nice because it is taking a benchmark data set and a publicly available data set, and the results can be replicated. So that's the result and analysis parameter. And publication, this is a very controversial quality assessment. Does the publication belong to a higher index journal or a conference? How many citations does the study have? Although we haven't given mud weighted because a recent study may not have many citations. So this is something, maybe I have done some wonderful Can you please mute your mic, Joseph? Joseph, thank you. So the publication criteria is something which, I may publish some research which is path breaking, which has been recently published. You may want to consider it, but you will leave it because it does not have citation. That doesn't make sense because it has just been published 1 month back. So considering this last as a parameter to determine the quality of research, and there might be, many of the good papers are published in top tier A-level conferences, and same is the case with, it's not the impact factor of the journal that your paper, it is a combined effect. What impact if it is used as a product in some or if it is included in a policy in some country, or it is used as a product in some business, then it has more impact. Your research has more impact than any of the publication in a peer reviewed journal. So the last parameter is a bit controversial, that is omitted in most of the studies these days. What we include is novelty, what is the novelty of the proposed technique in this, the technical content, and the results and the analysis. So basically the quality assessment in this research to determine what is significant, each article is given a score out of 10. The score was split according to the following values: 2 for novelty, 1.5 for publisher, 5 for results analysis out of 2, 2 for data set, 2 for evaluation criteria, 1 for the comparison with any existing techniques, and 1.5 for technical writing. So if you see, there might be a discussion that might come that there is a kind of bias that is introduced here, because the quality assessment that you're doing is as per your reading, your understanding, but then there are some parameters. There has to be a novelty that you're rating it as to. You cannot just blindly say it has nothing novel. So it is like something is better than nothing. It's that situation. It may have a bias, but then it is the bias is restricted to a point. You cannot be an extreme in that it has nothing and you say it has all the things. So you cannot be biased in your studies in that way. So yes, you do the quality assessment, and then you start extracting the data. Now what to extract? when we talk about extracting the data, it's not extracting the articles. Now we have the articles in hand. We started getting articles the moment we started using the search string. Then what we did was, using the search string, we had the 6 digital portals. We have our articles. We are maintaining a folder of the articles. We are using inclusion exclusion criteria, weeding the irrelevant one. We are using the quality assessment, again defining the boundaries. Okay, this is a good quality research, and we are only going to include that in SLR. The next is now how to extract the data so that we can draw the conclusions for this literature review, how to write the literature review part. That comes from data extraction. Now in this, it is actually using this data extracted, you will be answering your research questions that were defined in the first phase. You will need to find answers from the extracted data. So here in this case, generally what you extract is, here we have extracted the author, the year, publisher, technique, dataset use, context, performance metrics use, results proposed, methods to be extracted, and information is stored in a table for further synthesis. So basically you are trying to extract the evidence from the selected papers, what technique has been used, what data set has been used, which year it has been published, who is the publisher, then what are the performance metrics, has it been evaluated on the basis of accuracy, ROG score, blue score, F measure, confusion matrix, ROC, AUC, what has been used, what they have used, which is the data set. And then the final step is data synthesis, which of course can be of two kinds as discussed. The first is your meta-analysis, which where you using some kind of a quantitative statistical measure. The traditional or the more commonly used one is the meta-synthesis, which is the data synthesis, where your aim is to synthesize the entire thing. Now what you do in synthesis is you use various visualization techniques to synthesize the data. You structure that evidence on the basis of the data that is extracted using some table, graphs, and charts. You are trying to interpret the results. Right. So this is summarizing and interpreting the results. So this phase is structuring the evidence, and it has to be a repeatable process. Now, why do I call it a repeatable process? Because you can implement the search process and the study selection criteria twice. One initial, one maybe on expanded, some kind of Boolean expression and alternatives of the key search terms being used. And you can rerun the cross references from the initial studies. So the entire process has to be repeatable, or, redoable, reproducible, and repeatable. That's the point. So here you synthesize, and then you do a process monitoring, which is the last part, where you find out that all cross references have been considered, all alternatives, the language, because in some literature, what I can give you an example of, if I do a literature review on, say, rumor on social media, some spell it as RUMOR, some countries, British English and American English, some spell it as RUMOUR. So papers would be there on rumor control or rumor mitigation techniques on social media with the spelling of RUMOR, and it may also have RUMOUR. So you need to consider the search altogether. If you're focusing, maybe you are belonging in India, we follow the British English, so we are using the RUMOUR, but then we can also have an RUMOR. In that case, what do? You research, you do a repeatable process, and do the process monitoring so that you have included everything that's there. You should not leave the papers which have a spelling change in the word rumor. That's the point of focus here. Yes. So in this case study, this is the sample data synthesis, the last part that we get. What do you get is the synthesis should be able to answer one of the research questions. The final phase should be an answer to the first phase, if I call it that way. So your RQ2 was to uncover the variety of fuzzy logic techniques that have been used. So we were able to find out that these are the journals. If we want to put a discussion that which which kind, or we want to find it for ourselves, what kind of journals publish this kind of work. So we tried to find out, okay, so the International Journal of Soft Computing and Information Technology had 2 papers in that, whereas in Iranian Journal of Fuzzy Systems only had 1 papers on such studies. So we can focus on that, these are the target journals. So this is the traditional way.
Oh.
മാക്സിമം കൊച്ചി കിട്ടാൻ ശ്രമിക്കണം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ട്രിവാൻഡ്രം എല്ലാവരും അവന്റെ അവിടെ പോയി നിൽക്കട്ടെ.
Oh.
Can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. All right. So this helps you. Now we have journal finders also, journal suggesters also, but this can also be a substantial way to find out where it can be published or not. So, okay, this is the first case study. I will just go through the second study now, not explaining much, but what has been done to explain. So here in the second case study, we did a SLR of the cyber abuse in user-generated content on social media and real-time abuse detection on IoT. We did not know whether we want to focus, because somebody told social media, you may get the data sets. In the IoT, you may not get the data sets. So what to do? So the problem statement was, let us take a common term as cyber abuse, because somebody was saying cyber hate and cyberbullying happen on social media, but real-time abuse using IoT also happens, where you have surveillance and somebody bullies you physically, or keeper tracks or you, trolls you and follows you, stalks you. That's all, that also happens. But we did not know which, the scholar did not know which area to decide, whether he should go to do a research in the area of where there is more scope and where there are more data sets available. So it is a very broad term. If you look at it, the SLR is done at a very broad scope. Ultimately, the scholar did his PhD in the area of cyber abuse in user-generated content, because the data set was an issue in the IoT. The ethical issue came up. We cannot track, people faces and other things. Especially in UK, we have that ethical issue, approvals to take biometric of people. But then this was the broader topic that was decided for the SLR. So within this, we defined 5 research questions. The first one, which online activities on social media qualify for an abusive behavior? So we could find out, now I can tell you, we could find out that cyber hate, cyber bullying, they were all the online activities which qualify as an abusive behavior. Then which in-person abusive activities can be captured using the cyber physical system, that is using the IoT, which are the in-person? So bullying, grasping, or in school, or some kind of abusing, somebody who's wanting to forcefully drug you, somebody is, so all the things that could be captured on camera or using some kind of sensors, that can be done. Then which soft computing techniques have been used for cyber abuse, cyber hate, cyber bullying and real-time abuse, because we wanted to find out, the focus was soft computing. We did not know only to focus on ML, so we started with soft computing. Soft computing may have ML, deep learning, your probabilistic methods, your fuzzy logic, your genetic algorithms. So we made it very broad. The SLR is like very broad and extensive and a comprehensive study. But then we of course had the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Now, which data sets have been used for all these 3 categories? What real-time variables have been recorded to detect abuse in tangible environments? So these were the 5 research questions that were formulated to carry out this SLR. Then based on this, we had the search strategy. Here we had 5, we considered only 5 digital portals. There we had 6. Here we considered IEEE Explore, Science Direct, ACM, Wiley, and Springer Lake. We removed Google Scholar because the first one was done in way 2015. At that time, not all papers were, there were some papers which are there in Google Scholar, index in Google Scholar, but not in the Scopus ones and the other ones which did not belong to this. So what we did was we considered that also, but in this stage we included only 5 digital portals, and these were the search terms that we used. We defined these search terms because we use synonyms as well. So we also improvised our research, our search strategy. We use cyber abuse, online harassment, flaming, denigration, defamation, trolling. So we basically built a synonym data set or a synonym word set, which could be used to find out what work has been done on child abuse detection or hate speech detection online, or toxic comment, physical abuse, sexual abuse, bullying, teen abuse. So these are the, and then we use some kind of Boolean or and to find out cyber abuse and school bullying, cyber abuse and IoT. So we combine this and find out. So this was a very comprehensive and a very extensive, exhaustive job. which was carried out. So then the next step was to do a study selection, which was based on the inclusion criteria. Here, the studies published in the past 12 years were only considered. So we limited the span of the study. The primary and comparative studies of soft computing techniques were considered. Studies of soft computing technique using cyberbullying were considered, using cyber hate were considered, using hate speech were considered. Then the studies were not restricted to English language, but also to the code mix, code switch, and multilingual data sources. And studies on women and child real-time abuse were also considered. And what was excluded? Abuse is something which can have many articles: substance abuse, physical violence at home, and other things. So you may, if you write a simple word as physical abuse, you may find articles which are discussing about physical abuse at home, at work, and other things. So we could not focus, we could not include that, we should not, and we did not include that in our studies, because our focus was to, from the computing point of view, was to find out what has been done to automate the process, what is the, how AI has played a role, how soft computing has played a role. So the studies focusing on the theoretical aspects of abuse, such as its cause and effects, were excluded. Then studies on troll detection and offensive user profile and behavior, why you become trawler, if there's a personality disorder with the trawler. Bullies have this kind of, there are studies which discuss bully are very arrogant, and then they have papers like this. So that was not the focus of the research. So when you do enter a search string, you may get studies like this. So you need to omit that studies, and that's why you have an exclusion criteria. And studies that report the smart devices as alarm systems or SOS or GPS GSM trackers as a reactive mechanism to abusive detection. So if you see, this SLR is to find out real-time abuse detection using IoT. That is how an IoT device is used to abuse the person, and not how it is saving or helping a person from abuse. So that's what we excluded from this study, that our only focus was how IoT was used to, or we can call it how IoT was misused for something. So the focus was only that. So study restricted only to generic video surveillance using computer vision. If it is about general video surveillance, it will anyway, do a monitoring kind of thing. Then secondary studies were not included. Secondary studies means we did not include other surveys in this, though we had a paragraph in this how our literature survey was different from the previous surveys. We studied that, but did not include them as a part of data extraction and synthesis process. So that was the exclusion criteria in this case. So we had covered these three parts. The next was, of course, quality assessment. Here we used only three things that I've told you: novelty, the technical content, and result analysis. We omitted that publication criteria, which is not authentic, or which is not a right way to go it. And then we, using this quality criteria, this is how we got the review thing. So if we have 5 portals, from each of them we could find out these are the relevant ones, 21, 20, 71, 34, 5, total 151 papers. After removing duplicates, it came out to 132. After applying the inclusion exclusion criteria, it came to 119. And after applying the quality assessment, it was 111. And this was the cyber abuse on the social media platform. On the real-time abuse, it was 12 studies. So the total of 123 studies was considered in this review process. So this is how the entire review. Now again, when you want to extract the data, now there are 123 studies or 111 studies, how do you present the extract the data? It would become very difficult. So then in that case, you can use a methodological approach or some kind of approach where you can define, okay, I'll divide these studies. If there can be a clear distinction, we can define these studies into some categories. So here, because we knew that our purpose was this hate speech and bullying and something back on mind, so we divided these studies. And while searching also we found out, so we divided these studies into cyber hate, cyberbullying, cyber abuse, real-time use. So the first 3 categories, basically the cyber abuse one that we find out. But then we have 3 different categories here again. Cyber abuse is the one where there is no clear distinction in the paper on the type of, whether it is a cyber hate or a cyber bullying. It just talks about cyber abuse. So when there is no clear distinction, we are using it in that. Then the toxic, offensive, profane words are common to both. There were some studies which were like, we have in the search string, we have used toxicity detection, offensive word detection, profanity detection. Then what we did was, because this kind of words are used, for both cyberbullying and cyber hate. So we categorize them into the common category of cyber abuse rather than dividing it into cyber hate and cyber abuse. Then in person, another thing we called it RTA. So this is the sample of the table, the data extraction table, which is the cyber abuse on social media platform using soft computing techniques. What we did was, in the first one, if you remember, in study we had author, publication, and year. We had 3 different columns. Here we combined that column into one column. It's just a way of presentation in the table, where you have a publication where your author, year, publication, and whether it is a journal paper or a conference paper, you put it in that. Then what is the technique that they're used in the paper, and which is the data set they have used. We are not defining the results here. The reason for that was there were different data sets, and the variety of results vary. Some people have given the results but only the F1, some have given only the precision. So it was very difficult, and some have actually given the results in the form of graphs, and to extract that thing, we were able to comprehend that, but they were not coming out as good as in the table. So we decided only to stick to this. So this is how the data synthesis came. The ultimate step. The RQ4 was to identify the data sets which have been used for cyber abuse, cyber hate, and cyberbullying. So this is an example of the data set of the cyber hate. If you remember the data synthesis stage, you basically use visualizations to, like bar graphs, bar charts, pie charts, and graphs, and this ways to present or visualize, and tables to give your results, how the results are given. So the data extraction table is helping you to find out the answer to your research question in the data synthesis state, and there you visualize it using this kind of pie chart. So here we could visualize, okay, 14 studies have used Twitter to find out cyber hate detection on social media. Then 5 studies used Facebook, 2 studies used YouTube content, 3 used other publicly available data sets on Kaggle maybe, then other websites, 1 used Instagram. So there are different studies. So you could find out that most of these studies on cyber hate detection have been done on your using Twitter. So this was the conclusion. Similarly, we had our pie charts for the cyber abuse and the cyberbullying detection also. So this was one of the example of the case study that we did. The third case study, these were the 2 case study. First was the SLR for the automatic test summarization. Second was the SLR to find out cyber abuse detection on social media platforms and real-time abuse as well. The last is the SLR on context-based sentiment analysis social media. So this is again a very broad, term if you look about context-based sentiment analysis in social media. What we had in our mind was, there has to be a star paper or problem. We had the problem of sarcasm that exists in social media, or that is a problem. Sarcasm, irony, humor are some problem which are inherent to sentiment analysis, which actually which cause the which exploits, or which is actually a problem to the performance of a sentiment analysis tool. So then we eventually started reading, and what we find out was, in a linguistic part, the context of what is being written is very important, right? If we know the context, we'll know whether it is humor, it is sarcasm. This was general English literature that we studied, the study of figurative language that we call. And then it was not focused on sarcasm, although the PhD was on sarcasm detection. But this was the SLR, which was context-based sentiment analysis in social multimedia. Now, why multimedia? Because with the inception of Web 2.0, it does not remain just a text-only web. We also have memes nowadays, where you have, text being in a form of an image, an infographic which is there. So sarcasm is mostly there in the form of a meme. So we may want just not to focus on the textual part, but also on the video or maybe the images. So therefore, we just wanted to find out what work has been done on memes for sarcasm or irony or something. So we define this context-based sentiment analysis in social multimedia as a broad problem statement for the SLR. Mind it, again, I'm saying this is not your research. This may or may not be your exact research statement. In UK, probably we cannot have our research PhD thesis we do not enroll or take a PhD scholar until we have a definite research statement defined, unlike India. In India, we have our students selected first, then the interests are discussed, and you move ahead. Unless it's a funded project from DST or AICT or some other government organization, you usually don't begin with a definite focus problem statement. Whereas in UK, we have a research project where it is a definite problem statement. We have research objective defined because we need to get it approved for a funding so that a PhD can come and do a PhD. We do not have university funding. And even if we have university fundings, we need to get the proposal approved, get it peer reviewed, that this research and a PhD would be worth doing within the university premises. So generally, the SLR may or may not have the exact title of your research thesis. So here it is not the exact title that I'm talking about. So here 4 research questions were established. In the first, there were 3 research questions. Second was 5. Next is 4. So there's no definitive that how many research questions should be there. But generally it is said the upper limit is 6. Generally, it's not written anywhere, but then it becomes very cumbersome. If you're trying to find answers to 6 of them, then it might become cumbersome as well. But if your research allows that, then it's okay. So first was, what is the need of using context and sentiment analysis? In what ways, in which context been used in sentiment analysis? Which are the techniques used for context-based sentiment analysis till date? Which are the social media and the context-based sentiment analysis that have been applied? The last part, of course, tries to determine what kind of social media. Is it just text only or the multimodal part? Right. So once research questions have been established, again, the next step is to do the search strategy. The search strategy has to have your data sources, the search sources where you will be looking for, and your search string. So here again, 6 digital portals were taken. In the first one, there were 6, which included IEEE, Science Direct, ACM, Wiley, Springerling, and Google Scholar. The second one was IEEE, Science Direct, ACM, Wiley, and Springerling. They were just 5. Here it is 6 again. We have included a Taylor and Francis as well. So there are 6. So it's actually what portals you consider is also up to you, but generally these are the 6 portals now. This is like the most latest one, so you should consider all these 6 as of now. So the search terms extracted from the research questions were context, sentiment analysis, opinion mining, and social media. And these were used as the initial search strings, and synonyms were used. For example, if you're using social media, you can use Twitter, sentiment analysis on Twitter, opinion mining on Twitter, context on Twitter. Then you can also use Q, say sentiment analysis, Q-based sentiment analysis, hint-based sentiment analysis. So you're doing a mixed match of all these search terms to find out the papers. And you're also finding using some kind of and or Boolean expressions to find out and sweep, the research. Then the search is restricted for the time span, a little above the decade, commencing 2016 and concluding in 2017. So this is basically the part of your inclusion-exclusion criteria. So what has been included in the inclusion-exclusion criteria? The primary studies on context-based sentiment analysis, studies proposing different definitions of context, surveys have been included, comparative studies have been included, context and non-based context studies, special series devoted to sentiment analysis, then published only in journal. What happened was, because the sentiment analysis had been a so prominent and dynamic area of research, students from what's trying to start publishing to learn ML and having a conference paper, they started testing with recommender systems and sentiment analysis. And the conferences were flooded with papers of, sentiment analysis. So we only took the top tier conferences and deliberately omitted all the other conferences and only mentioned the papers in the journal, because it became very overwhelming to include all the papers of the conferences. The exclusion criteria were the papers which were in other journals, which had non-context, and before 2006, because this sentiment analysis has been going around since 2002, but we tried to omit that studies from 2002 as well. So next was quality assessment. Again, the quality assessment was same as the case study 2. We omitted that publication criterion and only uses the novelty. Only request you to please mute. Thank you. So novelty, content and analysis, results and data sets were used. And this was what the entire review process. We had 10 studies from Taylor and Francis, 198 from Elsevier, 9 from ACM, 58 from IEEE, 241 from Springer, and 57 from, Wiley. So from that total, we reached to just 37. That overwhelming amount, we reached to just 37. That is, after removing duplicates, we got 279. There were so many duplicates which were multiply indexed because all these platforms were now, some of the journals are ACM, IEEE combined, then so on and so forth. Then applying the inclusion criteria, some were published previously, some were conference papers. So we only got, because the initial one also had the conference papers, because we only had the journal and the top tier conference, so we were restricted to 89. Then using the quality assessment, if they were novel, they were actually using context or something, they were only 30. Then using cross-referencing, which was a repeatable process, I told you, we added 12. Then on that 12, we use the quality criterion, and then finally 30 plus 7, we obtained 37 studies. So this is a kind of a systematic way of filtering out and setting the boundaries of your research, because it can be very overwhelming with the amount of literature being published every day. So if you see that there were 241 only from Springer, and then removing duplicates within a journal, because a journal may have duplication, it is cross-citing related articles and other things. So we removed that, and then we finally moved on to 37 studies. So yes, the next part is data extraction. So what we did here was we extracted, this is a sample data set. We extracted the author publisher year, we extracted the technique, we extracted the data set. What is the type of context premium studies, context type, and what are the details and the scope. So we also decided to find out the details, because our ultimate goal was how they have used context, where they have used context. Have they used it in multimodal data, or what kind of data? So we use this context in that way. So this is the sample synthesis of RQ2, which was in which ways context has been used. So in sentiment analysis, people have used context as social context, temporal context, user profile, topical, co-occurrence, local, global. This is the kind of context we could find out from the literature. So out of that 37 studies, all these studies have generally taken the definition of context differently. So, as a part of the PhD, the first research objective became to define the multifaceted concept of context, because every paper had a different definition of context. So when we define a context, then we need to find out, okay, these are the categories of context. It can either be text based, it can be social or a user profile based, or be temporal. So based on this, a research gap was identified, that every article defined a context differently. And then we need to find out a way where we define a framework or some way where we need to categorize, okay, these are the type of context. I tell my students, I can be very honest, you write your research review as a way, think of it that, if you would have got it, how easy your research would have been. Think of it that you give it to the next person to read, so that the person gets that start from, oh wow, I got it, I can do a literature review on this, and yeah, so they are supposed to be a starting point. So what you did not get while doing your research should be given to the person ahead. So that's the way you start. So here the RQ was very generic. The statement, the SLR was very generic, where you were trying to find out the context-based sentiment analysis. So there you found out the papers which define context in a very different way. You find out that, okay, this paper defines it differently, these many papers define it this way. So what is the definition of context? Is there a generic definition that exists, or can we actually define it, or what are the types? So that became your research objective of the main statement, right? So this was a sample data synthesis. Now what I've done is I have done a kind of a data synthesis, I may call, of the 3 case studies. And that data synthesis is on the basis of the steps that you have, or the phases of the literature review. The case study one, if I want to, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to do a systematic. I've done a systematic literature review. I've got 3 case studies. I've seen what is the kind of data synthesis they use, what inclusion criteria. On the basis of 6 phases that we have in an SLR, I have taken that into consideration, all the 6 of them, the 3 case studies, and now I'm going to fill entry. I have the entries of my, I have all the details in the data extraction phase. And now I'm doing the data synthesis, which is the visualization. I request you to mute, please. Steffi, please mute. Thank you. So this is actually a conclusion for what you have learned, right? How am I going to do a data synthesis? What we have learned? Data synthesis of the 3 case studies. The case study 1, we have the number of RQs were 3, next were 5, case study 3 were 4. The search strategy, I've not included the search strings, but I could include that also, what has been used. But I included 6 databases in the first case study, 5 in the second, 6 in the third. What was the inclusion criteria? There were 6 inclusion criteria, 5 exclusion, 7 inclusion, 5 exclusion, 8 inclusion, and 3 exclusion. There was no time span in case study 1. Time span was taken in 2008 to 20.
Excuse me. The participants, Dept PL, please mute your mic. Excuse me.
Steffi PL, please mute your mic, please.
It is creating disturbance in the session.
All right. So then the quality assessment, here there were 4, here there were 3. Data extracted, here you extracted the year, context, performance metrics, and other things. Here you extracted studies were further divided into cyber hate, cyberbullying, and the publication was author, year, publisher was combined into one publication. Data set, language of the data set also was considered. Author, year, publisher, technique, data set, context, and this. Then here tables, pie charts, and bar charts. In this paper, only tables and pie charts. In here, tables, pie charts, and bar charts. So this is the data synthesis, the last phase or the meta synthesis of all the 3 case studies that we did. So this is kind of a visualization of what we did, what we extracted out of the 3 case studies. So here I have mentioned a star mark, the quality assessment, the JADAD score, and the TC Chalmers score. Basically, the SLR in healthcare domain is something different. There, the electronic databases are not generally the ACM and the SCI index journals. They use the Medline, ProQuest, and Scopus are more prevalent there. Then the quality assessment, they have a specific kind of a scoring mechanism that they do to filter out the papers which are scored in the randomized control trials. They use the JADAD score and the TC Chalmers score, which are standard. Then in the medical domain, they also, in the healthcare domain, if you're doing, say, you're doing an SLR on cancer, number of cancer patients below the age of, say, 18, then you have specific tools to do that. You have PRISMA technique, which is called the preferred reporting items for systematic review and meta-analysis. It is a tool for writing this SLR. Then the data extraction is done on the basis of specific kind of methods, which is known as PCOS or SPIDER. PCOS stands for patient or intervention, comparison, outcome, and study type. So SLR basically define healthcare domain. So the SLR in computing is different from what we have discussed in the domain of healthcare. You have a SPIDER methodology where you do a data extraction. What is the sample size? What was the phenomenon of interest? What was the design? What was the evaluation? What was the research type? Whether it was qualitative, quantitative. So basically, if you're doing it in management, you have a different strategy called Eclipse, where expectation, client group, location, impact, professional service, they all are taken. But basically, in our own field, in the field of computing, in all fields, whichever field you're doing, you need to consider the guidelines in your own field. In the field of computing, we follow the Ketchenham Charter paper, which has these 6 phases defined. And then you decide it on your own. So, of course, we have an overwhelming papers, as in the second case study. The final output were 111 papers, right? Or the 123 papers. The last one was okay. It was 100 the last one was 37 after all the shortlisting and everything. This was 123. So how do you manage everything? You're maintaining the papers in the folders or maintaining papers in the folders and on the drives. It becomes cumbersome. So there are some kind of reference management softwares which are there to support. There are many of them. I've given a table of that. Some are paid, some are free. Only basically 2 of them are free. One is RefMe and one is Mendeley. And Mendeley is the most popular one, which is used to manage your references, identify the duplicates and aid references. There can be a separate, session on Mendeley, how to use Mendeley and other things. But here I'm only telling you for an SLR, such reference management softwares are of very, very, very importance, because you send a paper to, that's my personal experience, you send a paper to a journal. An SLR can take writing, compiling an SLR and writing and submitting can take approximately more than a year, because you're doing it in a comprehensive way. Then you submit it to a journal, and the journal takes 6 to 9 months to revert you. By that time, new work has come, right? You want your things to be added, even if it's come as a major revision or a revision, it has to incorporate all the new works, and the comparison has to be done. So these kind of softwares allow that easy thing to do. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to give that on, within text citation, to manage the duplicates, to keep that referencing. So Mendeley is one such academic social network used for organizing your references, collaborating with others, discovering new research, annotating your PDF files, the important parts. You can annotate the work so that it's important for your data extraction phase. You can do that. Organizing your reference library. So these are there. And the reference EndNote is also used at time. It is used for everything, but Mendeley can be used on all kind of compatibility mode. It has Mac, iOS, everything. So Mendeley is one thing which is being used across the research community currently. So yes, we have research management. Then ultimately, what is the conclusion of the advantage of SLR? It reduces bias. We do have a little bias in the quality assessment, but then it is just something. It is replicable. It resolves the controversy between conflicting studies, because you only include the ones which are, which follow the inclusion-exclusion criteria. You have a very definitive study selection criterion to allow an entry to your literature review. It helps you to identify the current gaps, which are very important. Like I gave you an example in the context example, and it provides a reliable basis for decision making. It's not that you just throw the ball in air. It's like it is a step-by-step way where you are reaching to a conclusion based on the given evidences. So that's the advantage of your systematic review. What are the problems? There are problems. It may vary in quality. It of course depends on the person or the researcher. I have done 5 SLRs. I have improved in my SLR. From the first SLR, like I told, I took publication as a criteria for determining the novelty, determining the quality of the research. I improved in the second. No, publication should not be the criteria. So the quality may vary. It's my own, my peer, my group members, my team members, my supervisor. It depends on what team, how experienced are we are doing the systematic reviews and other things. So it may vary in quality. It requires updating often at the time of publication. I told you, using the reference management softwares can help to mitigate it. Then may not include all studies, especially non-English, gray literature. For some studies, census data, white papers, content on blogs and social medias and technical reports are very important. When you focus on these digital portals, you may miss these, and which may be very important. The technical reports, or may even the PhD dissertation in this case, that would fall in a gray literature in an SLR, because that won't be there on any of the digital portals that we are talking about, like ACM, Elsevier, or whatever you consider. So the gray literature and early literature which has not been indexed as yet, right? So maybe that the papers archive has allowed that, but then there is early literature which has not been. Most journals don't allow your paper to be there, even if there's an archive link, and they do not consider it as a valid reference if it is an archive, if it is being published. Some journals do have an issue with that. So then again, the last part which I've been talking about, quality assessment can still be subjective. So in medical sciences, in healthcare, they have made a score, but here it is again, we have a scale, we have decided, okay, a paper which has less novelty is given as 0.5, which is okay novelty is 1, which is really novel is 2. It's like when you do a peer review of a paper, you read that paper, even as a peer review mechanism, we rate it on the basis of novelty. Are the results novel? Is it contributing to the body of the knowledge? Is it readable to a novice, or it requires a previous knowledge within that area? So that is the kind of criterion you take to even review a paper. Similarly, to you are the peer review, not a peer review, but a reviewer, re-reviewer of the paper that has been published, and you are evaluating it to be considered in your own study. For that matter, you are defining this quality assessment. So this can be subjective to your own knowledge. So these are still the problems with the SLR. But having said that, SLR is the most, as its name suggests, the systematic, well-mannered way of doing a review in a research thesis, because it actually, if you have done an SLR, it actually forms your chapter 2 of the thesis. Just do not need to write or rewrite it again. It's just that the latest work, when you submit the thesis, you can always mention that, like, this literature review was done in 2020 and the thesis was submitted in 2022 or 23, maybe 2022. So what do you write in? The SLR was conducted for the period of this and this. Post this work, post this SLR, reporting of the SLR, few studies have also been considered, done in this space, which are as follows from this duration to this. So you can have a paragraph of that added in your thesis chapter, right? That can also be included. That should be included. Right? So the problem is solved from a literature point of view, and it gives you a very, very, very comprehensive way. And for further reading, of course, the base or the benchmark paper that we call is your Ketchenham and Charters paper, which was the systematic literature review paper, which was published in 2009. It is the systematic literature reviews. This is specific to the fields of computing. If you're from, I may call it computing or engineering for that matter, engineering as in biotech, bioinformatics, that would also work. But that in that case, you may also have a mix of the healthcare sciences and the computing one. So you can do a mix match of that as well. So this is the key ones, and these are the 3 other ones which are there. These SLRs which I've taken sample of, which are here. And now I am open to questions. If you have any queries, I'm more than happy to answer.
As we have come to the end of the session, it's time for the participants to ask your queries. You can also put the queries in the chat box, or just unmute your mic and just ask the questions.
I hope everybody understood at least. I am not sure if I was able to convey what an SLR is. No questions, that good. I'm hoping that it helped.
Yes, ma'am, of course. So participants, it's time for asking your queries. I hope most of you have different questions in your mind, so just shoot your doubts out. If you have any problem in unmuting, you can just put the question in the chat box so that I can read it for you.
We have to take care of it as a novel subject. A novel subject as in a novel domain you're talking about, a novel problem statement. Novel subject would mean, I would take it like blockchain is a novel thing, right? If I am talking about doing research in the area of blockchain, then I need to, focus on, at least decide on something. I'm going to look for blockchain applications, or blockchain methodology? What is your focus going to be? So you can start with that. I am only going to look for blockchain applications in the financial domain. My focus will be that, or only in the industrial domain. So that's how you start working. What should be the ideal length of a journal article, literature paper? Generally, it is more than 20 pages, generally, and it depends on what journal you're targeting, because most of the computing surveys, ACM computing surveys and the survey papers are nearly 20 to 30. That's a single column and single space. I'm not talking about double column or single column, single space font, which is basic Times New Roman, basic one. 20 pages it comes out to be, because it usually comes out to be, because with the results extraction tables and other things it comes. You can use our previous paper review in writing new SLR and can cite. Okay, if you're including reviews in your inclusion-exclusion criteria, you can include your work. But then if you're not including, there always has to be a paragraph on how this review is different from the existing reviews that are so far there, especially the ones which have been cited, well, in that criteria. That is what I take, the reviews which are the core, which people have been citing till date. You are basically targeting that people should start reading your review rather than the other person's review, right? That's your mind. It's that kind of a goal. So whatever that person has presented, you're taking it ahead from there. So from your cross reference, they can go to that review, but your review has to now become the face of that area. So you can include if you're using it an inclusion criteria. Otherwise, you need to write a paragraph of whatever reviews are there, and minimum how many papers a year should be considered in an SLR. How many papers you cannot decide. It depends on your quality criteria and inclusion exclusion criteria. You cannot predefine it that how many papers I will consider. And what years you can consider? Yes, you can. Generally, we start with doing a 5-year or a decade. So that's the standard. If you don't find papers in like 5, if you find 100 papers which qualify the quality in the 5 years, stick to that. Start with 5 years or then move to 10 years. If you don't find 10 papers in 5 years, then go to 10 years. And if you don't find, then go to 20 years or from the start. So it's like backtracking to the year wise. We generally start with that. Most journals have restriction on the number of pages. How to find an appropriate journal? Yes, that's the basic issue with publishing an SLR. Honestly, that has become very, very, very difficult to publish an SLR. They have issues in that. ACM computing surveys allows it, but it takes a time of around 1.5 years to do that. So the point, what I suggest is, try not to be repetitive in your data extraction and data synthesis phase. What I have read is the tables that are defined in the extraction phase are given as graphs also, and they are discussed also. You have to be very precise and concise in what you are trying to put in. So yes, how to find an appropriate journal is a very, 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 very difficult question till date. I cannot say that this research or paper can be published in this journal. This is appropriate for me and it will be selected. I do not know how the journal systems work in background, but yes, after having published almost nearly now it's going to be 50 SCIs, what I know is that journal should focus on that area. If you're trying to publish in the area of soft computing, if you're using machine learning, try targeting journals which talk about machine learning, or try focusing on, and do not go with high impact journals for literature review. Because the high impact journals are impactful because they publish novel primary studies, right? So any journals with impact of 0.9 will also work for your SLR. That is, if your organization considers an open access one, please publish your SLR in an open access if your degree allows that, because that would, relieve you from that burden of updating your SLR again and again, which is cumbersome. So finding an appropriate journal is something very prerogative and very to the point during that, what your area is. Bhaskar. And ma'am, can we use a published SLR in our thesis? Yes, of course. Of course, you can use your published SLR. It's your second chapter of the thesis. Your thesis can be 100% plagiarized from your papers. You can omit that resources from the Turnitin. You know, you're not going to write your thesis from somewhere from the sky. It has to be from your papers. Your papers are defining your thesis. You can use 100% verbatim content from your papers in your thesis. You use Turnitin to exclude the sources. The software allows you to exclude your own papers from that and then see what is the plagiarism. That plagiarism should not be more than 10% as far as I understand what has been defined by UGC. Publisher, and thanks, detailed presence, thanks a lot, thank you. Okay, any other questions? I hope I've answered the queries.
Any other questions from the participant side? I think it's all done.
All right.
Participants have expressed their gratitude for the detailed presentation. And
Thank you. My pleasure.
Today we had a very informative session, an introduction to systematic literature review methods. And I'm sure that the session will help all the budding researchers, all the participants who have joined here to master in the systematic literature review methods. And this will be a milestone in the research journey. I'm sure about that. On behalf of FISAT, Department of Computer Applications, and all the 200 plus participants joined, I would like to extend my gratitude to our dear resource person, Dr. Akshi Kumar, for such a fruitful session. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your valuable time. You have shared your valuable time and valuable knowledge with us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. I've shared my personal email ID because at times the official ID may bounce some mails. It may hold some mails from India. So if you have any queries related to writing an SLR or something, if you want a feedback, just mail it to me. I cannot commit on getting back on time, but maybe by 2 reminders, I will try to. I can only say.
So the participants can make use of man's email ID so that he can clear their queries.
Dr. Kumar Akshi at gmail.com. If you have any queries related to SLR or something, just get to me and I'll surely try to help you.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And to the participants, don't forget to fill the feedback form before exiting the meeting. The attendance and feedback link is provided in the chat box. So make sure you have filled it before leaving the meeting. Thank you. See you next day. Thank you so much.